Dennis, please let us know who you are.
Yeah, so my name is Dennis Kuntz. I'm located in New Jersey on the northeast seaboard of the Atlantic Ocean. I'm about a 15-minute drive from New York City. We fish in the New York Harbor as well as the Atlantic coast of New Jersey. And I got involved in reel repair, founding Second Chance Tackle about 20 years ago. The whole premise behind Second Chance Tackle is to give tackle a second chance, to work with broken reels, to work with neglected tackle and rods and the like, and to put them back into use. So I've taken my skills in terms of how to repair reels and fishing tackle and turned it into a small business. And over the last 2 years now, I've been sharing that experience on YouTube under Second Chance Tackle, where we have a growing subscription base and posting videos all the time about the latest projects that come into my shop.
That's great. So, do a lot of people who follow your videos, do they actually hit you up and send you reels that they tried to fix themselves, or they just don't want to bother and they just like, professional, please help me?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that because we started this quite a long time ago by word of mouth, and social media now is producing the word of mouth with folks you've never met or never seen. So a fellow may come on to my library looking for a specific reel because they either have it apart or they have a problem with it, view the video and either say, this is too complicated for me, or I tried to put it back together and something didn't work. Can you help me? And we have an ongoing forum, usually in text, that gives them some clues about maybe how to remedy the problem, but also I offer the advice and the service, if they want to do that, to mail the reel to me and I'll put it back together, or I'll service it if they don't want to undertake that endeavor. So yes, it's grown quite a bit. Surprisingly, I didn't think that would be an outcome of this, but it certainly has become one.
I think that's so smart because a lot of times, especially like when new people start a business, they tend to think that if they share anything, that somebody's going to copycat, or they're going to steal something from them. But I like the way that you're doing it because it's like you have nothing to hide. You're like, let me just help you. If you can do it at home, save money in the sending it over to me, or any of that stuff. Do it yourself. Feel good about it. But if you can't, then I'm here to help. I think that's just such a
Well,
smarter play.
and somebody asked me that once. They said, aren't you afraid that you're going to lose your customers? And I said, one, I can't fix all the reels in the world. And two, just by the passion for it. If they want to do it, I want to help them. A lot of the reels that you'll see on my channel and in my library no longer have folks that can even repair them. So you may search the globe to figure out who's going to work on a Berkeley reel, for example. Or some of the older Shakespeare's or some of the older reels in particular. There's nobody around that does that anymore. And even the new ones, some of them are more complicated than the local tackle shop would even want to take on. Bait feeders, for example. Nobody wants to do a bait feeder, right? And you're stuck. So you've made this investment in a reel. By today's standards, you may be $150 out on a broken part that's out of warranty, and you can't find somebody to service it. Well, that's a shame. And so I post this and I say, if this can help you put that reel back together, that's a wonderful thing. And by the way, everybody's going to learn from this as we go through the video, because you'll see how that reel is made, what the strong points are. We'll talk about the weak characteristics. We'll take it apart. We'll clean it up, put it back together. And if something's broke, we'll say, for example, that part's no longer available. The next best thing now is to go find your parts for that, right, on the used market, for example. So I try to lead them in terms of a way to make that repair and get that reel back working. And as the company says, give it a second chance.
Have you seen a change in the level of craftsmanship or quality of reels from the older models to the ones today?
Oh my gosh, how much time do you have?
I have plenty of time.
The short answer is yes. Okay, and we have this debate all the time, right? Are the reels made in China worse or better than the reels that were made in the United States? Has the consolidation of the reel manufacturers had an impact on what the products are? We talk about that all the time. The short answer is that your reels from the 60s, 70s, and 80s had a different manufacturing technology. It certainly had a different quality of the internal parts and pieces, but they weren't necessarily better. because there's other technologies that have come along, like graphite, like ball bearings, stainless gearing, things like that, that make those particular reels that are on the market today more valuable. What I have seen is, there's a nationalism that goes on out there, which I don't agree with, right? It's China versus the U.S., or it's Japan versus, the U.S., Shimano versus Penn versus Daiwa, simply because of the nationality of the place where it was made. My point that I always make in my videos when I have the opportunity to get up on my little soapbox is, I don't care whose hands put them together. What I really care about is the design and the engineering and the technology that backs that reel, and does that represent a value in today's marketplace? So to get back to your question, yes, if you look at an Abu Ambassador 6500 today, and you look at that reel when it was made in Sweden, there's no comparison. The materials today, I would view as cheaper or subgrade versus what you saw then. But Abu isn't Abu anymore. Abu is part of Pure Fishing. Pure Fishing is Shakespeare and Penn and Abu and Mitchell and the whole host of brands under one roof, and they're making trade-offs. They're certainly trying to make a price point. And that Abu 6500 that I referenced before from Sweden, that might cost you $250 today if you were to buy it. And the trade-offs that Pure Fishing has made to keep that at a $100 price point is what's resulting in a lesser quality or a different material that we'll complain about, right? But it's all what is the goal and the objective of what they're trying to accomplish, and to meet certain price points. So would they have done that if they had remained in Sweden, for example, with Abu, or if Penn had remained in Philadelphia, manufacturing there? I don't know. That's a question you won't get answered. Would they have cheapened it up here just to stay at $100 or $150 or a $49 price point? Just don't know.
I like what you're saying about it. I like how you said it. It's not about the hands who made it. It's about the design and the quality and all this other stuff that goes behind the scenes. I like that whole viewpoint on it.
I see it all the time. So they've changed the metallurgy in a jig master. Right, a jig master will probably cost $69, $70, something like that retail. If you go inside it now, you'll have spool shafts that'll freeze. That never occurred when you had chromed pieces, right? But it's just a trade-off that they made to stay at that $75 price point, right? So
based on all of the different brands that you've gotten your hands on, are there any of them that stand out, or maybe like stood out in the past but not so much anymore, or have been kind of getting better over time?
Sure. So that's a good question, because I'm always asked, what reel should I buy? And I always come back to the person about, well, what do you want to do with that reel? I've met people that have gone fly fishing for the first time, and I've gone out and bought a $700 Orvis fly set, right? The reel, the pole, the waders, bought the whole thing. Went out on the river because it happened to be a corporate event. Went out on the river, probably with the sharpest dressed guys there, decided they didn't like fly fishing, and it's hanging on a wall somewhere, right? By the same token, you hand the kid a Shakespeare rod and reel, it's probably available at any major sporting goods place for $19.99, and that kid can fish the heck out of that reel and have a real great time, and it'll meet his needs at that point in his life, right? So it's always about what it is you're needing. If you've got a cottage or a cabin at the lake or a beach house, and you're going to fish 5 times over the course of the year, you don't need to make an investment in the high-end stuff. It's not going to pay off, but it's going to give you the same enjoyment when you go out to the surf and make a few casts. When people ask me what brands, so I got 4 or 5 and a handful that I recommend. I say you can't go wrong with the majors, which is Daiwa, Penn, and Shimano, and I'll throw Abu in as a bait caster. Beyond that, you've got brands that are going to meet price points, because those major conglomerates, I mentioned Pure Fishing with that lineup of Mitchell and Shakespeare, and there's W.C. Bradley out there, which is Zebco, Quantum, Van Staal, right, and Finor in the middle of that, right? They all have good, better, best strategies, and they're all at certain price points. So if you want an entry-level reel, for example, you buy a Shakespeare. You want the next one up, you're going to buy the Mitchell. You want the next one up, you're going to buy the Abu. And then you're going to buy the Penn if you're in the Pure Fishing lineup. If you're over on W.C. Bradley, maybe you start out with a Zebco, and then you go to a Quantum, and then you go to a Finor, and then you go to a Van Staal. Each one of them probably jumping $50 for the same type of reel. But at the end of the day, if you stick with the majors, you'll do well. And one of the things that I put in that do well is parts availability and service and warranty. So you'd be shocked if you go on the Zebco website and try and find parts. The first thing that the Zebco website is going to say is there are no parts availability. We do not support nor service that. If it breaks within the warranty period, which is generally a year at most, we'll replace it. But they won't service it, and you can't get parts to do it. So one of the trends that I've mentioned, and you asked about that earlier, is we're going to a disposable society. We're going to one where either the folks aren't around to know how to service a Mitchell 300 or the older reels, the Daiwa Silver Series or the Penn Silver Series, or the parts aren't available, or the labor costs are so high that folks just dismiss it. Like what we started when we had a conversation earlier, I got started in this because my reel broke and they told me I couldn't get it fixed. It wasn't worth it. Right? Well, now you can't get it fixed, one, because it's not worth it, but two, because there's nobody out there to fix them anyway, right? So it is interesting. But the major brands, the Daiwas, the Shimano's, the Penns, the Abus, have parts availability. And that's important to me. And my recommending to somebody else what it is they should acquire.
That makes a lot of sense. I want to shift gears a little bit to, for some of the newbie anglers that might be listening to this podcast, and going over the kind of the different types of reels, and what they'd be used for.
Oh, sure. So there's about 4 or 5 basic ones. I'll probably screw it up along the way here, but the earliest reels were hand-lined reels. They were simply a circle that you wrapped line around. Could actually have been an old log, right? Where you're just wrapping line around it. Then you went to a center pin, which put a pin in the middle of it. That's think fly reel, where you put a pin in the middle of it and you just turn it in a circle to gather the line. Then you've got the next ones up were the conventionals. They came out in the late 1800s, the ones that we would know today that would have a bar frame and turning the handles. Level line guides came out they were invented by Shakespeare right around the turn of the century. So you had a level line that spooled the line like a thread. And then you went into the bigger saltwater reels. So you had somebody like Von Hoff, who invented the star drag system. You had Cokes at the time. You had Ocean City. You had Penn and those. And those reels have evolved over time to what we know today. So spinning reels came out after World War II for the most part. They became popular. So you would have direct pin reels, fly reels. You would have conventional reels, which we think of in terms of the spool where you crank. Sometimes they're called multiplier reels because you have a small gear drives a bigger gear and allows more line to wind with each turn. And then you would have spinning reels. And each manufacturer that we were talking about before usually has a complementary line that covers all those types of reels, although they may have a specialty in one or the other.
Awesome. That helps a lot. What is the proper care that somebody should be doing with some of these reels? Because, for myself, the most bare bones, right, would be just if I take it in salt water, just make sure I rinse it. But even that can have some kind of nuances, right? It's like you don't want to put high pressure in that might go into certain things and corrode certain bearings or different components. So what is the kind of beginner's guide to just taking care of your reels so they actually last longer than a year?
Good question and good observation too about the salt water. So it's interesting when I get a reel in the shop, I can tell within the first removal of a side plate whether that's ever seen salt water or if it's been a freshwater reel only. Salt water tends to do a lot of damage in terms of contaminants, debris, and the residual salt and micro sands as well. So the answer is it depends on the service schedules. But if you're a beginner, let's say you're getting out there a dozen times a year, and it's a New Jersey kind of a statement. If you're in Florida, let's call it 30 times a year. The best practice is to keep the reel clean, which would be hosing it down, fresh water only. Don't use the water source on a boat if you're out in the Atlantic or Pacific. But fresh water, rinsing it down, Sometimes you can take that reel off and put it in a pail of water and just let it sit overnight. That'll be another way to kind of flush the reel out. And then drying that reel out. So a lot of the time, what you would do there is use like WD-40, which was created as a water displacement. That's the WD to get the water off of there and to provide limited lubrication. The maintenance schedules depend on how frequently you fish. If this is your daily driver, or if you're out there for 4 months or 5 months out of the year, heavily fishing that reel, think charter boat or whatever, then you should tear that reel down about mid-season and do a complete and thorough internal cleaning in addition to taking care of it from that freshwater flush and the like. There's products out there that you can use. Penn makes a wonderful rod and reel cleaner. It's a little squirt bottle that you can just spray and wipe down and keep the corrosive substances off of it. But if you're fishing heavily, tear it down in the middle of the season. And I like to recommend at the end of the season as opposed to the beginning of the season for the final service, because when you put that reel into storage, you want to make sure it has the lubrications in there that prevent it from seizing up over the course of a long winter. You know, when we think of where people store reels, they store them in their closets, they store them out in garages, which can get cold, they store them in basements, which can get hot. All of that has an effect on the gears and the drags and the internal components of a reel. So if you take care of that at the end of the season before you put it in storage, you have less risk of that grease evaporating and those parts seizing or becoming dry in the case of dried reels, and becoming a problem when you go out for that spring run. In the springtime, just they have a lot of these have oil access holes and like. Usually just takes a drop of oil or two, or even a spray down with WD-40 to get it going again. The other good practice that I tell everybody, nobody follows, but I tell everybody, if you're fishing consistently, if this is more than just a passing quirk, take the line off at the end of the year and throw it away, because line is the most susceptible to breaking down and to causing problems with that fishing reel later on. I'm noticing braid today, particularly if braid is on reels that weren't made for braid. It's putting pressure on that spool, and that can warp the spool at the end of the season if you leave it wound too tight and put it in the storage. So get rid of the braid. I guess it's photo optic. I'm not sure what the UV, whatever it is, with monofilament will deteriorate monofilament over time. Monofilament's cheap. You buy 500 yards of it for a couple of dollars. Don't try and cheap yourself out of that and then lose the fish next season because you never changed your line out. So in addition to some of the basic lubrications, the annual service, get the line off the reel at the end of the season before you put it in storage and then start fresh in the next season.
Do you have a recommended set of tools and your grease and lubricants that you swear by?
I do. So anybody who's going to service a reel should at least have, at a minimum, the wrench that goes with the reel so you can take the handle off to get access to the oil ports. Have a small flat-bladed screwdriver so that you can remove the side plates. Have a wrench, a Phillips head screwdriver. And from a lubricant standpoint, you should have real oil and real grease. And I know you've watched a few of my videos. If I haven't said that more than once, I'd be lying. You know, people ask me what's an acceptable alternative if I don't have it. I said the acceptable alternative is to wait 3 days for Amazon to deliver it, because you can buy a 2-ounce cup of grease and you can buy a little squeeze bottle of oil, and I think the whole thing would be under $10. So don't use sewing machine oil. Don't use automotive greases and automotive oils and 3-in-1s. Believe it or not, when I first started this thing all those years ago, I ran into old timers that were using Vaseline. Vaseline's fine. It's a petroleum jelly, right? But the problem with these, if they're not formulated for marine use, they're either going to clog up because they're going to gather debris, or they're going to dry up. And I can't tell you how many reels I get in with just dried grease causing sluggishness, or they're going to evaporate quickly. And the evaporation is going to lead to a dry interior, and it's going to lead to worn gears and the like. So get the fishing reel oils and greases, get the wrench for your reel, get a flat-bladed screwdriver, get a Phillips head screwdriver, and needle nose pliers is usually pretty good in case something pops out and you need to get to a point where you can't reach them. My toolbox is a little bit more on my videos. You'll see in there. I have occasional use tools in there, but to get started on the basic maintenance, you don't need to do much more than the tools that we just talked about.
Now, if I'm putting on grease and I'm going out into corrosive environments, should I slather on a whole bunch, or is there like a perfect sweet spot of grease amount?
In my take, there's a perfect sweet spot, which is where it's translucent. You can see through it, but you can see that it's there. A light coating, in other words. But if you're not going to service that reel on a regular basis, you can go a little bit heavier. The problem with going heavier is that the reel is going to discard what it doesn't need. So it'll throw it off of your main gear. It'll throw it off of the drags, which should have grease as well, and for the most part. We can talk about that in just a second. And it's going to accumulate inside the case. Well, any kind of accumulated grease is either going to dry, or if you're in a saltwater environment, it's going to get that micro sand and it's going to get the salt after it evaporates from the water, and then it's going to bog down the reel. There's also a grease versus an oil thing in terms of bearings and on the worm gears of level wind reels. And I never recommend putting grease onto a level wind worm, because the same thing, the elements out there is going to cause that to kind of be like sticky fly paper. It's going to grab it, and then as your pawl is turning on that worm shaft, it's going to get affected and bogged down because there's dirt in its track, basically. So I always recommend oiling that. But you got to have a certain level of vigilance as well. You got to know that the oil is going to evaporate quicker. And so instead of waiting a year to go do a reservice, just keep that little bottle in your tackle box. And every now and then when you feel it's maybe tightening up a little bit, just give it a drop or two and it'll be fine.
So why do you grease your drags for the beginner?
So greasing drags, let's talk about what you should do with drags to begin with, because you shouldn't grease them all, right? There's three types of drags that are dominant in the market. Most of them you'll see the different ones in spinning reels as opposed to the conventional reels. The conventional reels are typically what Penn would call the HT100 or the Carbon Tex drag today. The drags goes back to when drags were leather washers. That was the first ones that were introduced, or fabric washers. And the idea of putting grease on them is to keep the washers flexible. And the grease would simply provide just a little bit of an extra edge so that that washer, or in the case of the leather ones, didn't dry out and crack, or didn't dry out and become part of the metals that are in between there. So you have three. You have the fabric washers. Those are the ones that get the grease. They'll have a Teflon washer, predominantly in spinning reels. You'll see them on certainly on the Zebcos, the Shakespeares, and the like. Teflon is a petroleum product, so you don't have to do anything with that. It's a plastic, so it's going to self-lubricate. And then the last one is a felt washer. And the felt washers, people used to think that they were cheap, but if you go throughout the spinning reel line, high-end manufacturers like Shimano are using felt washers in their system setups on sustains and the like. So the felt washers get a drop of oil. So all three cases are the same. Keep them lubricated so they don't dry out, so they don't crack and become inoperable or wear prematurely.
Is there a specific drag system design that you like more than the others?
The drag washer systems in conventional reels are redundant throughout all manufacturers. There's a variation in the number of washers inside a main gear, but the premise is the same. You have a main gear, a fabric washer, a metal washer, alternated up to, well, I just did one today, which was very interesting. I had a fellow send me a reel, and he had the ultimate upgrade kit. It took a 6-washer setup from a jig master and made it a 10-washer setup by thinning down the metals and using Carbon Tex drags instead of HT100s. The whole idea of drags is the more area you have, the higher the drag resistance is, theoretically, the more weight you can pull with that reel, right? So the Conventional reels are all pretty much the same. On the spinning reels, you can go from 1 to 3, but it's the same idea. You'll have a fabric washer interspersed with a metal washer, and so on. The only variation in that is lever drag. And lever drag has a single disc, a single pressure plate, and as you flip your lever, the lever pulls the pressure plate onto the disc to provide more resistance. If you're asking me to pick a favorite between the two, I like the principles behind the lever drag, but the lever drag makes the reel a little bit more bulky and a little heavier. So it's typically targeted at saltwater fish and big game fish.
What are your thoughts on super tuning reels? Because I've seen some guys, they'll buy these kits with ceramic bearings or whatnot, and it's pretty impressive like how long they can spin and all those other things. But what are your thoughts on the super tuning kits, or have you ever done one of those?
I've done them, but probably as a last resort, not because I wanted to super tune. But back to this reel that I was working on today, it was a 501, which is the narrow channel Jigmaster. The fellow put a Tiburon frame on it, put ceramic bearings in it, and now he's converted over to the 10 drag system as opposed to the 6 drag system. To me, if you want to do that, it's perfectly fine. It's going to take that engineering to the next level. But I always trust the guy who designed it to begin with. We were kind of talking about that earlier with, the Japanese versus the Chinese versus the different brands and manufacturers. I trust that those engineers had it right. And if you purchased your reel under a set criteria and you found the best match for the types of fishing you're doing, then I just go with that particular reel. Now, have I super tuned? I have super tuned. I've done ceramic bearings in the Daiwa Silver Series, one of my absolute favorites. So if you ever find a Daiwa 7000C there, go get one. It's a wonderful reel, and if you put the ceramic bearings in that, it's going to do wonders to that particular reel. I've also taken a 302 Mitchell and put a ceramic bearing in that one. And the reason I did that one is I couldn't get a regular bearing for it. But there is a marked improvement in that, but I don't recommend it for everybody. If you bought the reel that's going to meet your needs, it's always going to do what you bought it for. And unless your needs have changed, just keep it properly maintained and you'll be happy for a long time.
Just for my curiosity, what does the ceramic bearing do differently than the stainless steel bearing? Is it just doesn't need as much lubricant, or the coefficient of friction is a little bit less? What makes them superior?
That sounds good.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know.
All right.
I really don't know the answer. I'm just going to tell you there's less drag in it, I would guess, right?
Okay.
So
that
it's
makes sense.
Slipperier, if that's a characteristic of it.
Yeah. Cool. And then, so you've seen, how many reels have you serviced at this point?
You know what?
Just a guess.
I'm crazy. I would guess I do over 500 a year.
500. That's so many. That's impressive.
Yeah, so 25 years. I wasn't doing 500 25 years ago. I had a job. But no, I do about 500. Yeah. I still do the boat that got me started. I started trading my services for free trips on a charter boat. And I still do that, guy, and I still do take free trips.
That's not a bad gig right there. I know we talked about your kind of seeing a pattern in terms of quality over time. Is there any other patterns you've seen from servicing that many reels that are like stand out that probably other people wouldn't see?
Yeah, there's a Me Too element, I think, but that's always been there. I think as you've consolidated down the number of manufacturers, we talked a little bit about that with Pure Fishing, WC Brading, and so on. I think you may be losing some of the innovation that we saw that was so crazy in the past, right? There's a couple of dynamic points in real history, not that I'm the expert at that, but right around the turn of the century with the Industrial Revolution, you had a whole group of fishing reels start to come out just because they took the industrial designs that were coming to play at the early 1900s and started applying them to fishing reels. The second change was really right after World War II, because the technologies that we developed in the war, the materials, the engineering specificity and the like, just lent themselves to lighter weight reels with better characteristics behind it. I guess if you're manufacturing a turret on a tank, you can probably figure out how to make gears mesh on a fishing reel, right? And when in post-war. And then lately, it's been the graphite wheels, was the later revolutions. Now graphites and bearings in the late 1990s, 2000 stuff. But I think we're losing innovation there. We're seeing things, if you look at the manufacturers today, they'll tell you, now I have CNC cut gears, and now I have stainless gears, and that's at the upper end. If you look at the value reels today, that reel could have been made in the 1960s if you opened up the case. It really hasn't changed much. But I would say the lack of competition is probably stifling innovation. And if that's a trend, then I would definitely call that out in terms of something that's happening today.
I remember back during my engineering days, there would always kind of be a little bit of a disconnect between the people, like the engineers designing, and then the guys on the ground who would assemble or repair. If you can say anything you want to one of the designers of these, real companies, what would you, if you could wave a magic wand, wish would be in there? Or like some of this innovation that you're saying, like what would you be like, this should be possible and this would make this reel so much better? Like what would be your thoughts on that?
Yeah. The one that I have the personal pick with is the bait feeder. And that's why a lot of people don't even service them. And the problem that I have is not necessarily with the engineering behind it. I get it, right? You have a dual drag system. You have a drag on the bottom that's going to control it when it's in bait feed mode. And you have a drag up top when you're in regular mode. The personal pick that I have with it is that the engineers probably have figured it out as a one-time, never to be opened case. And when you open it, springs fly everywhere, and you have very little support from the manufacturer in terms of what that schematic actually is, and having a technical support team that tell you when you get stuck how to go put it back the right way. And I just recently experienced one of them. I had a pen clash bait feeder. I eventually got it because I have something of a mechanical aptitude, but I could see that one in the trash bin in more places than in my shop because it's annoying, right? So what I would fault manufacturers for is if there's bad design from the beginning, and I would ask them, to make sure that the aftermarket service team has ready access to it, or at least has access to the technical specs to go figure that one out. It's not unlike a car, right? It's a mechanical thing. And I've heard mechanics tell me don't work on certain vehicles because in order to get to a particular thing, a transmission or an engine, you got to take the body off the car, or you have to have a lift in order to service this. You can't, just go under the car and do that, right? So, and some reels are like that. But the major manufacturers that we talked about, I don't have any issues with them. I think they're doing a great job, even with the current product releases. And I marvel at some of the technology. I love the worm gear inside of a Shimano. Right? They took the worm gear from a conventional reel, put it into their sustain and the like. It's beautiful technology. And I sit back and go, I wish I could do that.
What are your thoughts on the level wind system? Is that a big issue that comes into a lot of the reels from your clients?
I do see a lot of level winds for repair. The level wind has been around forever. It was introduced by Shakespeare in 1897. He's got the patent on it, and it actually was William Shakespeare that patented that. He was from Kalamazoo, Michigan. It wasn't because he happened to be the favorite bard that he liked to read. It was actually William Shakespeare who patented that. So it's been around forever. So what are the problems today? Well, braid makes it one of the problems today. It's always been a problem, but braid makes it a problem, particularly if nobody's using the leader and just attaching that braid directly to their rig. When that thing snags up, and they start trying to lurch the rod, right, or power it through with turning the handle, it's always going to fail at the weakest point. And the weakest point in the level wind system, well, there's two of them. The first one is the idler gear, which is normally a plastic gear inside the side plate, which transfers the energy from the spool to the worm gear to drive that. The other place it's going to fail is at that line guide. It's either going to bend the pawl because you're putting too much force against an immovable object, or it's going to bend the line guide itself. So yes, I have a particular issue with line guides, but it's only because you've introduced another level of convenience, which becomes another level of technical things that can break. And when I look at what comes into my shop, those are the three most common things that will break on a level wind reel. normally because they got snagged up somewhere and decided they were stronger than that reel was going to be.
Yeah, more components, more problems.
Yeah.
Going back to braid, how do you know which reel can even support braid? Because I've had some where it's like I would, right when I was really getting back into fishing, I would take a few of my old pens to the shop and be like, oh yeah, I figured everybody's using braid, I should put this. And thankfully I'd have a really good shop owner be like, that reel is not designed for that. Is there any criteria that you would say like braid is not good for certain reels versus other ones?
There, braid's been around now for about 20 years. Right? It's nothing new. Actually, the old linen lines of the 40s was braid, right? It was braided linen as opposed to polymers today. The braid reels today, I think, are fine. Interestingly enough, one of the biggest problems you have with braid is braid slip because the braid is too slick to grab the spool and it'll cause problems downstream. Well, most of the manufacturers today now have either put a through hole or put a rubber band or put some other kind of thing that's going to hold the braid from slipping. That was their issue there. When braid first came out, braid was very coarse, and that had an abrasive effect on particular reels. So you would see, let's take a Penn Long Beach 60, which is the kind of the standard of the day, right? It would wear off the chrome on the crossbars because it would be like running sandpaper across it. If you had metal eyelets in your fishing pole, it would wear down the metal eyelets. So manufacturers have adapted to braid now. So I don't think there's an old reel that can't use it, but know that it'll either have a cosmetic effect on it or it will have a very abrasive one that eventually will lead to a failure. So that old pen of yours that you may have taken doesn't have a ball bearing line guide, has a chrome plated bell wire, right? With an abrasive braid running across there, you're going to have brass before before too long, just because it's going to scrub it. But otherwise, I don't know. I've seen all kinds of braid come in on all older reels, and they work fine. Save what we talked about earlier with your annual practice. I would take the braid off at the end of the season because as you're pulling on braid, it does compact down where it's not being used, and it does put pressure against the sidewalls of the spools.
I'll definitely take note of that. Okay, so is there like a top 10 things not to do with reels that you can kind of give us so that we don't make any bad mistakes and have to send too many reels your way? If we could just
We kind of talked about some of those already, right?
right.
I think appreciating that it's a mechanical device and that wear is imminent and that there's certain good practices to do, then the bad practices become the inverse of that, right? So we're all guilty of coming off of a boat, having a social event to run to, just chucking it in the back of a trunk on a 100-degree day and letting it sit there for a month or two without taking care of it, right? So, clean applies across the board, regardless of what mechanical device is. Keep it clean. Don't ignore things. If a reel is chirping, don't just keep fishing away with it. Just, take your time, get it serviced earlier. It's going to certainly remedy the situation, but it's going to cause you grief later on if you just keep compounding that by letting a chirp become a real scream and the like. If it's loose, if you've banged something, if you've cracked something, all common things. If you're on a pier or if you're on a gun wall of a boat, it's easy enough to whack a side wall or get so excited and have the rod and reel fall down or whatever it is. So just examine the reel on a regular basis. Check it out. Tighten the screws. Do the regular maintenance on the reel, and you should be fine.
Okay.
Just don't ask it to do something it can't do.
That's really good advice right there. All right, I want to switch gears a little bit and kind of test your on the spot, no preemptive anything. Some of the reels that I have, as we were talking about before we started recording, my late uncle who got me into fishing, pretty much had a whole bunch of reels in the garage, and I recently just inherited them. So I'm trying to figure out if it's still a good reel to either use or to donate to somebody who might want it, or if you have any stories that you like about that reel, because I feel like you know a lot about the history of a lot of these older reels, and it'd be kind of cool to like lock that into the podcast.
This should be fun, John. So I started the YouTube about 2 years ago, and it was simply a camera mounted on my workbench, doing whatever project came in that day. And we've expanded that. That library is over 200 now. But I've also expanded the topics, because the question you just asked there is a question I get all the time. How old is my reel? What's the history behind it? What was it used for, and can it continue to be fished, right? So I started one now where I'm actually doing the histories of fishing reel manufacturers. And that Shakespeare rolled off my tongue, because Shakespeare was one of the ones that I've done earlier. And I've just done Langley, which was a fishing reel that was popular in the 1950s. And I'm going to continue to do that. But here's one for you first, and then we'll make it part of the history here on your podcast. Do you know what Zebco stands for, or how it got its name?
I did a little article on it a long time ago for my website, but I forgot.
Okay.
No, fill me in.
It's the Zero Hour Bomb Company.
Oh, that's right. Yes, it was.
Yep.
Yes,
The
yes.
Zero Hour Bomb Company. And then, so of course, you think Zebco came out in the late 40s. It was a post-war company that was founded. And you think that the bomb had something to do with World War II, but it didn't. They were the bombs that put out the oil when you have a gusher and you have to quiet it down. Mm-hmm. That was the bomb that they used to do that. They would create a vacuum and it would stop the gusher. So it wasn't even a World War II bomb. Shucks.
I always find it fascinating to see how these companies, just in like not a short amount of time, but just over the years, change so drastically. You know, it's like they start doing one thing, and then 20 years later, they almost look like a totally different company, just because they're, kind of evolving with what they need to do for their shareholders.
Well, a lot of what has happened there is that these were founded by individuals, and it was based on innovation. And when those individuals passed on, or it got time for them to do something else, the interest either waned and went out of business, or it got consolidated into somebody else who maybe didn't have that shared vision that they had as an innovator or an entrepreneur. And yeah, it's changed a lot in the second generation, or the transition to a corporate identity. So yeah, it is always fun to watch that stuff. And that's why some of the folks were asking about, can you do the histories of that in those YouTube videos? That's why I picked that up.
I think that's really smart. Along those lines, before we get into these reels, are you also doing any tutorials or whatnot on how to find quality reels on, like, say, eBay or Facebook Marketplace, so that people, instead of just buying a new reel, and adding to that consumerism, you're actually saying, like, you can get a good quality reel probably for a quarter of the price or half the price of a new one, and this will still last you 15 years, if you take care of it. Are you doing any of that kind of stuff too?
I am, and I have about 5 or 6 episodes on that. So that started over the past summer when somebody said, well, where do you get these reels you're working on with your videos when it's not a customer's reel? And I said, well, again, in text, right, back and forth on the forum. I said, well, I go to flea markets, I go to garage sales. People approach me, reels find me every now and then, right? Somebody will bring one in and say, my dad left these, or my uncle gave them to me and I don't want them. What are you going to do with them, right? So I started doing a series on it. It's called Flea Market Finds, and sometimes it's called Fishing Flea Market, and sometimes it's called Fishing Marketplace for my latest favorite, which happens to be the Facebook Marketplace. And what I do there is I kind of point out some of the basics that you should use, how you should examine a reel, how to make sure that it's functional, and if it's not functional, before you go and make a purchase like that, make sure that there's parts availability, or at least there's used equipment out there in the marketplace. There could be a donor reel if you were to go and take 2 and make 1 out of that. So I have started that. What's a quality reel, or what you should be looking for? Cosmetics is always a clue in terms of whether the reel is going to be functional or high functional versus just sort of grinding away. If you look on Facebook, I always distrust somebody who's posted a reel with a blurry picture with no description. Because chances are there's a reason why that reel is for sale, and it's not because it was his favorite reel. It's probably broken, or it's probably in the process of breaking, or it's probably been poorly maintained. If you have a reel that's nice and clean, that the chrome or the metal parts are shiny or not terribly suffering from any kind of abuse that you can see visibly, That's usually the clue. You can always you can ask questions on eBay too. You can contact the seller and ask them about the condition. Ask them if they are selling the reel for someone or if this is their personal reel. And if it was their personal reel, how did they fish it? And a good seller on eBay is going to come back and answer that question. If they ignore that question, I wouldn't purchase that or make a bid on that for anything. Right? It just doesn't make sense to do that. A lot of people are in the business of flipping reels, so know the value of a reel if you're on eBay. And eBay is a great resource. eBay at one point, I think, was actually going to publish a price guide that says this is the bandwidth that these particular things are selling for. But know the value of the reel, use eBay as a guide, and then based on condition, either plus or minus it. So if an average reel, let's pick a Penn Long Beach, is selling for $20, if it looks like heck and it's got all greening on it and the chrome is gone, don't pay the $20, right? In the meantime, if you have one there that's nice and bright and shiny and hardly looks used and has the box and the documentation and the paperwork, pay $40 for it because it's probably worth it, right? But that's the other advice I would say is there's plenty of these reels out there. Don't get caught up in the enthusiasm on eBay and go bid crazy because you think it's the only one around. It's not, and you can find ways to make that find that reel even if the price is not right on the particular one.
Is there a reel that is kind of like a hidden gem that you wouldn't mind sharing, or do you?
Yeah, so there's reels that I admire for their technology, for their innovation, for the way that they were introduced, and some of them are not necessarily expensive. I mentioned before the 7000C Daiwa Silver Series, made in Japan and Korea in the 70s. It's a beautiful reel. I fish with it every day. It's got the loudest anti-reverse clicker in the world, so it drives people on boats nuts when I happen to be reeling in, but hey, I'm reeling in, right? So I like that particular reel. The one out there that's kind of the holy grail these days is the Newell reel. It was invented by Carl Newell. He was an avid sports fisherman out in California. He was an engineer by trade, and he had his own engineering company. He loved the Penn reels, but always thought that the Penn reels could be improved upon. A little bit to your question earlier about what I would tell a designer. And his specialty in engineering was plastics. And so he came out with one of the first graphite-cased reels. He had ball bearings on both sides, and he had stainless steel gearing in that. What a beautiful piece of machinery. So if you're asking me which one I go crazy about over there or I get excited about if I had the opportunity to find, it would certainly be a Newell reel.
Well, let's talk about this Newell reel right here.
Oh my gosh, it's got one.
Now that you say it, because this is the one that I was like, what is this thing?
Right. So a decade ago, you could have been buying these reels for $60 or $70.
So well,
you're going to have to back to where you are.
Oh, can you see it?
There you go. So that reel that you have in your hands today is probably selling for around $250. It's appreciated that much in value. Do you want to take it fishing? Second Chance Tackle says put everything in the water, don't put anything on a shelf.
Well, that's my thing. It's like I definitely want to use this one. I was like, this is a great reel.
What the heck?
And I don't think it's even been used, to be honest.
So if it hasn't been used, it's got the box and the official paperwork, and you're strapped for cash.
Here's the paperwork.
There you go.
I even have extra components that came with it.
There you go. So, you've got a treasure in that one.
Well, that's exciting. That is exciting. What would I be targeting with this reel specifically?
That is that's a saltwater reel. It's got high capacity. It's probably 400 yards of 30-pound monofilament that it would hold. You're going to be targeting pretty big game fish with a reel like that.
Well, I'm trying to go for some tuna, so perfect.
There you go.
Exciting number one.
You'll bring them in.
That's great. Okay, now I'm going to throw you another softball. This one's a pretty popular reel. I believe it's the Penn Senator 4/0.
Yeah, so those have been a mainstay on the charter boat trolling community. So the 4.0s, just for everybody to know, if you're on eBay or whatever we were talking about a little bit, we can kind of mesh these topics. There's two sides to the 4.0. The early 4.0s had a black side plate on them, and they were a lower ratio gear retrieve, probably 2.5 or 3 to 1 turn. The burgundy ones became the high speed and those have increased up to 3.5 or 4 per turn. The 4.0s with the burgundy side plates also have ball bearings in them, as opposed to the black side plated ones, which did not. Typical pricing on a 4.0, probably around $50 on eBay. Target, it's going to be a fish that's either going to be a fighting fish or a heavier fish. So you're going to have a 20-pound fighter, like a bluefish here on the Northeast, or a 50-pound or 60-pound grouper or something if you're down in Florida, or a yellowfin tuna or something like that in that 60, 75-pound class out on the Pacific.
Exciting. Okay, do you do some bait casters, right? You don't discriminate. Good.
I pretty much do it.
How about this?
So a caster is a round reel. It's just got a squish on it.
Just low profile.
Yeah, pretty much the same designs.
Okay, how about this Daiwa Procaster SM2A?
Okay, so that one's probably about 20, 25 years old. It was one of the first of those low-profile bait casters. It's got a solid reputation, and it's one of the first ones that I had until I happened to lose it going overboard.
What fish took that one?
Yeah, I'm human, right? No, actually, I had caught a fish. I had unhooked it. It was an oily fish. I had the oils on my hand. I went to cast, and it went right out from under me.
Oh man, are those worth anything, or?
They're in the $20 to $25 range.
Okay,
not particularly worthwhile, but it's a great reel to learn on, and it's a workhorse. You can't beat that one up.
How about the Daiwa MA10G? It's the plastic.
So the MA, I think, means it's got a mag in it, which controls the casting. And that would be the difference between the two reels there. And the other thing is the casing. You go from a metal case to a graphite case. Low-profile bait casters have just become expensive. In the past, those were the little flipper reels for the bass, and you could probably find every one of them with good quality that was going to last you a long time for under $30. Now you're getting all of these fancy, well-designed ones that can actually go saltwater, like a Chronarch or some of the other ones out there that'll be several $100s, right? The Revos, I think, are 110 to 200 plus kind of things from Abu. So the market has definitely moved upscale in terms of the tech, but you can still find a perfectly acceptable Bass Pro flipper for $40. It's going to meet most of everybody's needs, unless you're on the pro tour.
How about, so my dad really liked Mitchell, and you're saying the old school Mitchells, they were kind of just above the Zebco, you were saying? Is that
no, the
new ones? Okay,
one.
the old ones were more higher end, or is that?
So for the time, that was the reel to have. So the Mitchell, like, which one do you have there? 300, 302? I can't.
This is
so you have the newer one.
This is a newer one. I have older ones in there.
So I had the opportunity. I always fished with a Mitchell, but I never took one apart until several years ago, believe it or not. And I had the opportunity to purchase a tackle shop's supply of Mitchell parts and parts reels when they were going out of business. And I started taking them apart and really appreciating the design and the technology behind those reels. They were really quite advanced for the time. The 300 was around from the war years in the 40s up until about 1989. I think the actual 300 was probably discontinued in about 75. So Mitchell was an interesting one. Mitchell finally went bankrupt. They got acquired, and then eventually became part of that pure fishing enterprise. Now, the one that you have is a graphite case, and by today's standards, you would have that as a medium value reel somewhere in the $30 to $40 range if you were buying it new. They still have the 300, but it bears no resemblance either in design or technology or comparison to the older ones.
Well, while we're talking about the older ones, how about this Mitchell Epic?
That one I don't know about. I think you got me on that one.
Yay!
All right. I can tell you it's a round bait caster.
It's a round bait caster that has a broken level line. So maybe this is the one I send you.
That's the one you sent me. If parts are available. So And see, that's the problem with a lot of them. They're not available.
Right.
So what's going on in the manufacturing industries today? And I hope I'm not boring you with
No,
this stuff.
I hope I'm
But
not taking up all your time because this is hilarious. I love this. This is amazing to me.
the manufacturing industries today have not changed dramatically over time. So there's a top tier manufacturing group, and we mentioned those brands before. They're going to make their own fishing reels in their own plants. They're going to control the design and the quality and the marketplace for those particular reels. There's always been a jobbing element in the fishing reel business, which have been the store brands or have been off brands or have been the second tier brands that are out there. And, who makes a Bass Pro reel, for example, or who makes a Cabela's reel, right? You really have to dig to find out who's really manufacturing that behind. So what happens is that manufacturers and distributors will go to, in this case, most of the time it's China. They'll order job lots and make me 100,000 of 50 size spinning reels to these specs. And they leave it to that manufacturer and they come back and they're branded and sold out into the world today. That's probably what that Mitchell is. I have no idea who made that. I don't think Mitchell has its own plant anymore. I'm sure it's job lotted out there somewhere to one of the Chinese firms, but I couldn't tell you.
No, that makes a lot of sense.
And the problem with parts aren't available on job lots because make me 100 of them or 100,000 of them. And I had the experience of trying to chase down parts for a relatively well-known brand, which I don't remember at the time, but I called them up. I said, well, where's your parts? No, we don't have parts. I said, well, how do you fix the reels that are under warranty? He said, well, of the ones that we ordered, we set aside a certain amount. If we can't fix it, we'll send them a new one. If we can't fix it, we'll go into some of those surplus reels that we held in reserve, take it apart, pull the part out, and put it back into somebody else's, right? So kind of fun. What you learn, right?
I love all these topics because my dad reminds me just like you because he does what you do but for bikes. So we have the same conversations where he's like taking apart an old Schwinn that he found at like the flea market or whatnot, and he's just like, I can't believe this person was gonna throw this away because the tire was flat, but yet the bike is like pristine condition, or just needed some degreasing or derusting and just chrome it up a little bit with some sand, with some wool and some polish. It's just funny to me. This is great.
Must be that generation.
Yeah. Hey, no, but it's to me, to be honest, it's like all my bikes come from him, and they're great bikes. He's just like, what bike do you need? I'm like, oh, I want this. Here you go. It's probably the best bike you can even get right now without having to get one from like overseas. So I have a lot of these made in Sweden pen ambassadors.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm a pen ambassador. Oh, yeah, sorry. The Abu. This one's the 6500 CL3. I have a 5500. Are these pretty good?
They're very good. Very good. We were talking about that earlier when we said, you can't compare a modern day 6500 made in China with that Swedish reel. There's just difference in the level of componentry. I'm sure the engineering is the same, but they've changed some parts to plastic parts. They've changed some parts in terms of thinning down or changing the metals behind them. All the guys are saving a couple of pennies to keep it within a price point. Those reels that you have, the 5500s, the 6500s, I'll put them in those treasures with your Newell. They're going up in value every day. It used to be that you could buy one of those for $25 or $30, and the ones you just showed me there are probably in the $70 to $75 range now.
What's crazy is my uncle, when eBay was just first starting out, he would be able to go on, buy, broken reels, but most of the time he knew that the manufacturer had a lifetime warranty. So in theory, he would just send all these. He would just buy up like hundreds of reels that were broken, for pretty much peanuts, and then just send it to the manufacturer because the people didn't know, and then they would just send him back a new one.
So like buying those craftsman screwdrivers at the flea market and taking them to Sears for replacement.
Exactly.
Right? There you
exactly.
Go.
I don't know if they still do that, but it's kind of funny. How about
most of the manufacturers' new ones are they're not lifetime warranties. I can't remember a lifetime warranty in one.
Right.
But it's interesting. You can find good deals on parts reels on eBay if you have the aptitude or the desire or the knowledge to put them back together again, take them apart and put them back together again. I just bought a pen squirrel, which is a $175 reel. I paid $45 for it because the guy said it's got a grind in it. I took it apart, and the grind happened to be a broken bearing. So for $7 and a little bit of effort, under $50, I've got a squirrel that's a $175 reel. So you can still do that today. It's just you have to be selective and you have to know what you're looking for.
Well, it's getting a lot easier now that people can watch how you do it and then at least try.
There you go. I'm destroying my.
No.
I'm sure that flea market I go to is the only one in the country, and I'm sure.
That was too good.
This world is big. If anything, I've learned from social media is it really is a small world. And when I get contacted from folks in Sweden and Germany and places like that, just really tells me about the power of social media and how much fun it really can be.
Yeah, how do you price out your stuff? So if somebody listening right now and they're like, "Oh, I do have a whole garage full of reels and I want a couple of them fixed." Do they just email you through your website and then you just be like, "Oh, this is how much the parts are going to cost in my time"? How does it work?
Sure. So there's a nominal fee. Most of the reels don't take that long to put together. There's a nominal fee, but it varies depending on the type of reel. So a spinning reel, low-end spinning reel doesn't cost that much, and an international size lever drag reel that's on a charter boat is going to cost you more, right? But it's generally that nominal fee plus parts plus return postage and tax. It's pretty much uncomplicated. If they have a reel that they're interested in, they can certainly send me an email, and I'll disclose to them what the cost would be, and it's their decision as to whether they want it done.
Perfect. Do you have time for a couple more reels?
Go right ahead.
All right. How about this?
You're running this podcast, not me.
Hey, no, I just want to make sure I'm cognizant of your time, but I'm just like a kid in a candy store now that I actually have some clarity on these things.
That's why we started the history of reels over on the YouTube channel.
I know, I'm excited.
Yeah.
You're pretty much going to just take up all my nighttime, so keep making these videos. How about this Daiwa Millionaire 4H?
So another nice reel. It's very comparable to the Abu that you had before. This one made in Japan as opposed to made in Sweden. Same functionality, same use, same high quality parts and pieces. As I mentioned before, if somebody said, "Give me 5 brands that I can trust," right? Penn, Shimano, Daiwa, and Abu would be right up there. The 5th one, I guess, would depend on what type of reel they were looking for: surf versus round versus baitcaster versus whatever.
Do you get a lot of Avets to come in? I have a lot of guys over here in SoCal who use them, so I'm just curious.
I've worked on Avets, actually, the Soltis from Daiwa, the Avets. So that's the compact lever drag reels. You were asking about trends before. That's one of the trends that's going on in the United States today. Everybody is downsizing the length of the rod, the weight of the rod, and the buying the compact lever drag reels, where you used to have a 7-foot or a 7.5-foot heavy weight rod with something like that 4.0 Senator that you have there. Now they're fishing an Abbott on a light medium pole on a 6.5-foot thing that you might have thought somebody would be bass fishing with. But that's a trend. And braid has made that possible. Braid has lightened everything down because now you don't need that bulky reel to hold 30-pound monofilament when you can put 30-pound braid on there and get the same capacity in a lower profile Avid reel. Avids are high quality. And what I see, people say, well, why don't you work on the modern reels? Well, I don't work on my videos show a lot of the older stuff because the modern reels, where they're under warranty, it doesn't make any, nobody's going to bring it to me if they can send it back to the plant for warranty maintenance, right? So I don't see a reel like that for a year or two, typically. And a lot of the support on some of those higher end reels is very reasonable. He says, send it back to us and we'll service it for $50 and we'll replace any worn parts. And that's reasonable, especially if you made an investment of $350 or $400 for that reel. So I always tell the fellow, if you can afford it, send it back to the plant. You'll get everything set to factory spec. They've got the parts and pieces right there if you've broken anything. And if you have a route back if the thing breaks again.
That makes a lot of sense. So I have a bunch. Let's getting into the Shimano. I think we can close out that last major
Okay.
brand. But I have a bunch of these Corsairs, CS200A, and a whole bunch of different ones.
Just had one apart today. I actually had
Yay!
the 400 apart today, which is the wider version of the 200. Nice reel, medium price range. It's under the Calcuttas, right? So Calcutta is their kind of their flagship in terms of the reel. You also had Torium and you had Dakotas as well. But the Corsair is between $50 and $70. It's a solid reel. The technology inside it is not very different from the other Shimano reels. And keep it lubricated. That'll last you a long time.
You said the which one? The Calcuttas were the ones that were.
The Calcutta is their in that product series. The Calcutta so it would go from a Corsair, it would go up to a Torium or a Dakota, and then it would go to a Calcutta.
Gotcha. Well, here's an old pen, Levelmatic 920. Have you worked on one
Okay,
of these?
that's the gold reel, right?
Yes.
So you don't see that one around much. It's a lower ratio. It was kind of set up for freshwater fishing. It's a lower gear ratio, so I want to say 2.5, 3 turns to one. It's in favor with collectors because you don't see too many of them, but nobody was really fishing those anymore.
Okay.
So you put that one on a shelf, use it as a paperweight, use it as a spinner if you don't know what to do while you're sitting at your desk, kind of just spin it around and occupy your time. But the technologies of today with some of those bait casters and some of the other things you're showing me, that's far superior to what you have there.
Then
Beautiful reel.
I think then this one might be also a paperweight, or I could be wrong. It is a Fluger Akron.
Akron.
Akron, sorry.
Yeah, like Akron, Ohio,
Akron.
which is where it was made.
Okay.
That's a beautiful reel.
It's a
I
very
just actually, if you're watching my things, I'm going to put up a Fluger Rocket. I'm going to put that up in the next few days, and the Fluger Rocket, and that one is essentially the same reel. It's relatively uncomplicated design. They've been around since the 30s or 40s, that particular design. And what you get inside that reel for how it was made in the day is incredible by today's standards.
interesting.
Is it squeaking?
Um,
That's the only thing, and they tend to dry out.
oh, not really.
Oh, okay,
Pretty good.
good. Something's
Here's another old one. I think this
Put oil.
is yeah. I'll have to oil up all these things.
There you go.
A direct drive Shakespeare number 1924. Have you worked on one of those?
I have. I put one up there not that long ago. Again, so Shakespeare came up with that level of line technology as we talked about right at the turn of the 20th century. That reel that you have there, probably, what's the date code on it? There's a secret decoder, believe it or not.
Ooh,
What's the
interesting.
model number? It should be on the side plate.
It's not. Oh,
I don't
there it is. No, that's more or less.
like EB or GC or something like that.
Oh,
There's actually
model number FK.
FK, so I think F is the 50s. I'd have to check my secret decoder, but I'll get back to you on that one. But those, I used to call those department store reels or general store reels. That's what every kid kind of grew up getting for one of their first reels.
I think
Well,
this one still has linen on it.
there you go.
Oh, here's a.
Boy, you got quite a collection there.
Yeah, I got a lot. Sorry.
Don't be.
I have a
Yeah.
black pen. Trying to figure out. It says number 85.
Okay.
This one has seen some better days, and it has.
So you have a wooden handle on it, which makes that pre-war.
Oh wow.
So that's from the 1930s and 40s. Penn, the guy who founded Penn, worked for Ocean City Reels before he founded Penn. He split out in the 1930s to go form his own company. Ocean City was not Ocean City, Maryland. It was actually the Ocean City. It was out of Philadelphia plant. This fellow was a German immigrant. He came over and decided he was going to do it better himself. And that 85 reel has the same technology in it that most of the Penn deep sea reels into the 1970s and 80s had, as the same technology setup. I believe that's called the Seaboy if you want to know the name behind it. But nice reel.
Well, I guess I did find one Calcutta.
There you go.
There you go. This one is this one only freshwater or can work for both?
It can go for both, and it's
Thanks.
brace capable, and it's a nice reel.
Ooh, exciting. Okay, this one might be my new favorite toy.
Take that one to catch the bait fish when you're going for the tuna.
There you go. So I'll have that one, and then I'll follow it up with the Newell.
There we go.
And the last reel that I think we've. This is it. As I got a bunch of these Daiwa black and golds in various
BG.
sizes. BG
So
10,
the
15, 20.
BG series is one of my favorites, and the one that you're holding up is one of my favorites as well. We talked about the 7000. The BG replaced that, and the BG series is we'll call them bulletproof. They're tanks. They were well over engineered for the purpose, and they've stood the test of time. And then you have a BG series even today. Now they've of course made the technological advances that all of those manufacturers have made over time. But the BG series that you're holding there is fantastic.
If you had to go between comparing the Penn Battle 2 and the Daiwa BG of today, which one would you tell? Because I get that question a lot.
It's an unfair comparison. So the BG should be compared against the Spin Fisher.
Interesting.
Fisher. It shouldn't be compared against the Battle. So in the good, better, best world, Penn's value line, I'll call it anything under $100 these days, a value line. It starts with the Penn Pursuit, then it goes to the Penn Fierce, and then it goes to the Penn Battle. So the BG by Daiwa standards today is not the value line. It's the better, not the best, but the better. And that would compare against a Penn Spin Fisher.
And the top of the line Penn, is that the Slammer?
No, Slammers are no longer made. I think the Slammers are actually in the Spin Fisher line. Slammer was a term they used for the under the spool drag system. There was actually branded as Slammers for a while there. I think now they're actually Spin Fisher Slammers or something. I'm not actually sure what they're called. No, and I forget exactly what it is. It begins with the letter F, but it's there is a reel that Penn makes that's comparable to a Van Staal or to the high-end Daiwas that are out there, the high-end Shimanos that are out there. They're in the $500, $600 range, right, or more, right?
Right.
But I never see those in my shop. I probably should refuse to work on them if they come in. I'll just tell them the $1,000. Like I can afford to screw up on a $40 reel.
Right. Do you ever get guys in the distance casting game?
No.
They usually just probably buy top end stuff.
Well, and those are the ones that, to your question before, those are the ones that are going to hot rod a reel.
Yeah,
right. They're
going
to do what they can to get the maximum spool spin with the least amount of resistance, right? But no, we don't. That's not a sport around us. But you do have guys come in saying, I threw it 150 yards or 170 yards, and you ask them what they got it on. They got it on some telephone pole that's like 15 feet long.
Exactly.
And
going for those crazy stripers or something.
No, we don't play that game here.
Love it. All right. So Dennis, how can people one more time find you? How do they get in contact?
So what I would encourage them to do is just go on to YouTube and put in Second Chance Tackle. And second is like Second Avenue. It's not spelled out. It's 2ND Chance Tackle. You put the spaces in. That'll pull up my videos that we've been talking about. I would encourage you to watch them, like them, and subscribe. That's what keeps my channel going. If you want to contact me directly by email, then just take the spaces out of Second Chance Tackle. So it's 2NDCHANCE @gmail.com. And I try to make a point as I'm growing my YouTube channel to return and acknowledge every comment and every question that's out there in a relatively short period of time. I got to be honest with you, it's getting crazy, but I'm still doing it.
Hey, respect.
And, I can still have my cup of coffee in the morning. I'm retired now, and answer a few emails and some questions. So, and that'll be the next segment I'm actually going to start doing on my YouTube channel now. I get so many questions on such a variety of things, like the questions that you're asking me today, that I think I'm just going to collect the questions that have been sent to me over the week on the website and just do what we're doing here. Just pull up the question and kind of have a little bit of a, here's the answer sort of a thing.
Well, it's funny. I was going to recommend that you do that because I remember listening to some of the car show car repair guys on like NPR or whatever back in the day as
Okay,
a kid.
yeah,
There is zero
sure.
difference that you're not doing that with reels.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, it's like it would just be awesome just to listen to you talk about this stuff all day.
So some of the cues that I get is from those car repair shows. So when I first started this back 2 years ago, what do I know about this stuff, right? And I was just watching cable television, and one of the Motor Trend, I guess it wasn't Motor Trend at the time, whoever was the channel at that time, just watching the guys taking an engine apart and saying, "This is what I'm doing now," and this is what and I could do that for a fishing reel, and that's kind of how I got started with it. On the YouTube side now, there's some good people out there doing some nice things that I'm taking cues from as well. And question and answering is one of them that I saw along the way. I happen to be automotive as well, and so I'm learning, and that's kind of keeping me vibrant, and I'm kind of enjoying doing it that way.
I love it. So my last question I ask everybody is, why do you fish?
Why do I fish? That's a good question. So some of it goes back to being a kid and just the memories of spending time on a boat with my dad or on the surf, and you know, making memories. So sometimes you're just reliving memories for the fish. I'm a catch and release fisherman, so it's not about basic sustenance, and it's not about look at the size of the whale I caught here. I do catch and release even in salt water. So I think it's just for the fun of being out in the near the ocean or in the bay shore, trying to improve your skills along the way, and just creating memories for today and tomorrow. So I don't know if I mentioned it to you somewhere in there, but my grandchildren are getting to that age where it's time to kind of pass off the rods and the reels and show them how to do it. And I look forward to the day where that can be done.
Love it. Thanks, Dennis, for coming on the podcast. Really do appreciate your time, and I'm glad I'm able to have one reel that you haven't seen out of this massive
We'll take
collection.
care of that one.
Thank
We'll
you.
do that one gratis just because I haven't seen it, and then I can say I've seen it.
There
How's
you
that?
go.
Well,
Perfect.
John, thank you so much for the invite. This has been unique.